Well, the topic for tonight is distance to connection. And people sent in a variety of really interesting questions about it. And the ones that struck me were, how does distance arise and how do you move towards connection? So that's what I want to talk about for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then proceed on with the class. So one of the things that's very common in relationship, and it's kind of written about in different books, and it's not novel, but it's this idea that there's different phases in a relationship. That relationships traditionally will tend to go through different phases. And so a lot of relationships, again, I'll talk in generalities for a bit, and then try to move into some specifics. So a lot of relationships begin in this romantic ideal phase. And there's a certain passion, enthusiasm, vitality that's engaged in that stage. It's kind of intoxicating. It's kind of amazing. And you think, oh my God, you like vegetarian pizza too. Or, wow, you went to Seattle once, so did I. I mean, there's all these amazing synchronicities and fantastic understandings. And there's a kind of a idealism that's built into that romantic phase. And it's almost like our psyche is like, I want to find somebody perfect and you're it. You're the perfect one. Oh my God, you had a Volkswagen? Me too. That's so amazing. It's so incredible. So our biologies, our minds, our psyches are moving in this romantic, passionate, energetic way towards this beloved. And that was what you could call phase one. People have this powerful biochemical, there's no question that it's a biochemical experience. But as part of the idealism of that phase, people tend to hide certain parts of themselves that they do not think are going to be acceptable or understood or welcomed by this new amazing person that likes to scramble their eggs in a specific way. Okay? So some of that's conscious and some of it's unconscious. So hidden within the idealism is a kind of a innocence where you're not revealing all of yourself to your partner and they're not revealing all of themselves to you. So then comes what is often called in lots of books, phase two, where you wake up one day and you go, oh my God, this person is not perfect. They left the cap off their toothpaste. Do you know what that implies? Do you know what that means? And I'm speaking humorously, but what actually happens is more complex and even more interesting parts of people's personalities tend to emerge over time. You can't keep the veneer of idealism, of naivete, of romantic passion forever. And you know, it's hard to say. For some people, that phase two starts in the first week, or the first month, or the first year, or the first decade. I mean, it's can go for a long time, but it eventually will transition into a more rich, complicated set of personality structures interacting with each other, and you can no longer hide some of your fears, some of your jealousy, some of your angers, some of your forgetfulness, is the fact that you don't know how to park a car, or that you get lost in big cities. I mean, things just start to happen, and your partner is like, really? So there's a deeper process there. And I think at that point, there's a fork in the road. And I think sadly for most people, most couples, they take the fork in the road, which is like the sign says, we better not talk about that. And there starts to be a list of things you can't talk about. And once you started into that part of the path, you take that fork in the path, the emotional vitality starts to diminish. Because as you suppress certain topics or certain feelings or certain histories, then you start to suppress some of the aliveness, the moment-by-moment vitality. And we know couples like this. Many of our parents have made these kind of agreements. They will have cooperative lives, friendly lives, or worse, of course, there's much worse versions of this, but there's a certain emotional intensity, intelligence, passion, energy, which is missing. And sadly, most of the relationships that we look around and see are like this. And so in that fork in the road, there's what I call the fork towards consciousness, the fork towards vitality, the fork towards connection. So I'm trying to explain really quickly how distance arises in relationships, how that it's that narrowing of the emotional content that leads to distance, that thought in your head, which is conscious or unconscious, I just won't talk about that. I just won't bring that into the relationship. So more and more emotional content gets left out and the emotional distance begins. So in phase 3, you're left with a decision. Are you going to continue in this relatively emotionless, and I say, people can be really angry in this phase. There can be a lot of so-called feelings, but they're not happy feelings. They're not feelings of connection, of energy, of vitality, of transformation. So the fork in the road that I wrote a book about, of course, and teach about, The Path for Couples, really asks people to use consciousness to create intimacy, to create connection. So I want to talk a little bit about a client example of this and show you how it could happen, because it's a little theoretical. The couples come into counseling all the time. That's what I do. And oftentimes they're in the beginning of that third stage and they're thinking, I need help. I can feel this distance beginning to emerge. And so what I've talked about in other classes, and actually online if you want to email me later and get a link, there's patterns for this distance creating. There's patterns of creation of distance: attacking, defending, pursuing, and withdrawing. Now, I can't go into all the details of those patterns right now, but we all do versions of them. They are all unconscious reactions, or reactions we were trained to do, our particular version of attacking, defending, our version of pursuing, withdrawing. And couples can get stuck in these patterns. If you notice, attacking, defending, pursuing, withdrawing, they interlock. So to use like a client example, couples will come in and say, we're stuck in attacking and defending. And I want to ask them some basic questions like, how do you do that? What is the actual pattern? And that's what I call in my book self-awareness. Like if you're not aware that you're going into these predictable patterns, I guarantee you're pretty much condemned to repeat them endlessly. And in a long relationship, we could be talking hundreds of times. So when you bring consciousness, you start to be able to talk about what's underneath the attacking, what's underneath the defending, what emotions and beliefs are underneath the pursuing and withdrawing. And what turns out is that many people that are caught in the pattern of pursuing, which is kind of sounds like, why aren't you ever spending time with me? I need more time from you. I got to have more time. Oftentimes that's fueled by a fear of abandonment, a very small person's fear of not being taken care of or not being connected with. And the withdrawal, the pursuer needs a withdrawer. The withdrawer is often coming from a background where they didn't get much space to develop their identity. So that pursuit looks like a threat to them. It's not like, oh yeah, I just love to connect with you. It's like, it's scary to open. And in that withdrawal, they're protecting their identity. So in couples counseling, I try to explore some of these underpinnings of these particular patterns. And that's where it was lovely when a couple of people talked about empathy and understanding. Because when you're stuck into pursuing and withdrawing, there's no empathy. You just think your partner's like totally crazy. Why do they act like that? But if you understand that they're experiencing fear, which is at the bottom of most of these patterns, and it's a fear of something that usually happened well before the relationship started, then there's some empathy and some deprogramming that happens. You're not so likely to pursue and withdraw if you start to understand that there's fear at the basis of most of these patterns, or hurt, or sorrow, or loneliness. And you begin to talk about that. And that's the discourse, that's the emotional communication that actually leads to connection. As you can note, the pursuing and withdrawing just keeps amplifying. The more you pursue, the more you withdraw. And then, of course, the pursuer gets tired of that, and the withdrawer goes, I better pursue now. So it just goes back and forth in this really dense pattern, this dense psychological pattern in which there's repetition but no understanding. By dropping down into the fears, the anxieties, the lonelinesses, and the sadnesses, which are more difficult to talk about, you start to build up understanding, and you start to build up a feeling of connection. So the goal of this whole investigation, the goal of the book, A Path for Couples, the goal of couples counseling, the goal of this class is to create more positive feeling. I think most of us have this inner sense that we can be more loving, we can be more understanding, we can be more empathetic. And it's my job and my goal to help you do that, to help you achieve those new states of being. And again, this is not rocket science. Okay, people want the basics. They want to feel love, they want to feel connected, they want to feel warm, they want to feel creative, they want to feel at peace in their relationship, they want to feel secure. So in the distance, all those things disappear. And in distance, you feel resentment, isolation, the beginnings of depression, some anger can leak out. So in the distance, you are not going to experience these positive feelings. So the positive feelings that come out of the two things that, one I've talked about, and the first thing that we worked on was, the first practice was intention. That's how you create the environment in which you can open up to each other. And then that deeper communication, that vulnerable, emotional, vulnerable, self-disclosing communication is what creates that closure, that closeness, that intimacy. And what I find with most people, and I've said this a lot of times, why did I have world geography in high school? I don't care about the capital of the Ukraine right now. I would rather have had a communication class in how to talk to people like this. So I had to learn, and now I'm teaching people how to do that. It's a course, and the course is going to be compiled in these online courses through couples counseling and in my book. It's in my book. So I guess what I'm trying to end with is the goal is love, kindness, generosity, all these deep feelings, states that we sense are inside of ourselves. And we're looking for a methodology, a set of practices that would bring out these inner states, these inner experiences. And it's my own experience, as a person that's now almost 70, that these things can't happen accidentally. You need a path, you need a discipline, you need practices. So that's probably where I'd like to end with talking about distance and connection, and love to hear if anybody has any